Okay, so let me start again. Just want to thank everyone for joining this event. This is Humanities in Action, Storytelling, Mapping, and the Arts. My name is Paul Sabin, and I'm the faculty director for Yale Environmental Humanities and a professor of history at Yale. And this panel is the first of what we hope are going to be a series of events featuring public humanities projects undertaken by members of the Yale community. We've now offered 2 rounds of grants for a variety of projects, including documentary film, oral histories, theater, and community collaborative efforts and art projects as well. And these public humanities grants are part of our effort to show the vital and enduring importance of the humanities at a time when they're under considerable pressure on university campuses and also beyond. So if you're a member of the Yale community eligible to apply for a grant, I'll drop the link for more information in the chat. So I'll put that in here. And if you're at another university or organization, I encourage you to find ways to create similar funds to support humanities innovation. This effort's actually modeled on a similar type of program that I used to run at the nonprofit Environmental Leadership Program, and think that these kinds of funds are very effective for encouraging people to develop ideas and pursue projects and to unleash a variety of different kinds of innovation that we'll hear about today. So also, if you would like to join the Yale Environmental Humanities newsletter list, you can sign up for that on our website. We circulate one email message each week on Mondays, just letting you know about what events are going to happen in the next 2 weeks. And while some of those events are only available to the Yale community, many others are open to the public and are online. I want to thank our sponsors and supporters, including the Yale School of the Environment, the Whitney Humanities Center, the Macmillan Center, and the Humanities Division of the Faculty in Arts and Sciences. I'm also particularly excited about our new partnership with the Center on Race, Indigeneity, and Transnational Migration. We're seeking a postdoctoral fellowship right now, if you're eligible for that. So we have a tight schedule today, so I'm going to introduce our presenters in the order of their presentations. First up will be Meredith Miller and MJ Millington talking about their project, Dreaming Animals. Meredith Miller received her MFA in photography in 2003 from Yale School of Art, where she also won the Blair Dickinson Memorial Prize, and she works as a senior photographer at the Yale Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library and teaches at Southern and Western Connecticut State Universities. And she'll actually have to drop off this event midway because she has to go teach, so which we celebrate. MJ Millington also is at the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, where she catalogs rare books. And in addition to this job, she is a poet, a multimedia artist, and a creator of the podcast Rhyme, Stories from the History of Poetry. Her publications include My Secret Inky Vice, a Beinecke collection of creatures, 17th Century Gentlemen Talk About Flowers, and others. And she was a winner of the Vermont Center Broadside competition to 2020 with Meredith for their broadside collaboration, Dreaming Animals. And also the 2018 Edwin Way Teal Artist in Residence at Trailwood, and has twice been shortlisted for the Bridport Prize for Poetry. Grace Cajski is an undergraduate student at Yale College. She comes to us from, well, she's currently, I think, maybe New Haven, but comes to us from New Orleans, and she's double majoring in environmental studies and English. And as part of her public humanities project that she'll be talking with us about, she's published essays in Eco Magazine and Oceanographic Magazine, and also in Humanities for All, which is a publication of the National Humanities Alliance. Laura Pappalardo graduated from the Master, and Grace's project is titled Talking Story. Laura Pappalardo graduated from the Master of Environmental Design program at the Yale School of Architecture this last year in 2021. And her present research contributes to uncovering the history of environmental impacts on the Atlantic forest remaining in Sao Paulo within the traditional lands of the Guarani. Before Laura worked as an architect in Sao Paulo, and she received a BA in Architecture and Urbanism from Escola da Cidade in Sao Paulo, and she'll be talking with us about her project, which there's a longer title for it, but is Mapping for Reparations. So with no further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Meredith and MJ and hear about your project. Thanks so much for sharing it with us, and thank you everyone again for joining our event today. Meredith and MJ. Oh, sorry, one last item. So we do have, we're going to be doing a Q&A after each of the presentations, and there's a Q&A function that should be available to you, and so you can put some your questions in the Q&A as you go forward, and I'll be asking those and others to each presenter at the end, and if we have time at the very end, maybe we'll have a full panel discussion at the end of the 3 presentations. Okay, thanks.
So thanks so much again for Environmental Humanities for this grant and for the opportunity to speak about our work today. So I just wanted to open with my website, which is meredithmillerphoto.com, and then I'd like to show you MJ's website as well. You know, MJ, if you wanted to say a few words.
Not quite yet.
Okay. So on MJ's website, I wanted to point you to this Beinecke collection of creatures. So this actually began MJ's and my longtime collaboration. So this was in 2016 for the Beinecke's 50th anniversary. We helped to make a coloring book of animals in the collection. And you can actually download that directly from the Beinecke's website.
And yes, I included the link for that in the chat as well. But I wanted to point out that it's a great survey of Beinecke's collections relating to animals, because the pictures in it were drawn from across our collections. So
great. And we've also been collaborating at the Yale Health Plan, where we helped found and start exhibiting artwork there. So we've been on a little bit of a hiatus because of COVID, but if you visit the website, you can actually see the 2022 call for artists. So you still have time to submit work related to the theme of care by February 1st. So going back to the COVID lockdown of 2020, for a few months, you know, during that time when we were totally unprepared to be at home working, you know, I'm normally a studio photographer at the Beinecke. So without the equipment, without the materials, I took the time, which was basically 3 months before I returned to work, to sort of institute a personal artist residency. But still connected to the Beinecke, I began printing out images of animals, mostly endangered, from the Beinecke's digital collection online. So I printed them and began creating still lifes with related household objects. So whether, you know, it's an IKEA, you know, tray with elephants on it, or you know, an old stamp collection with images of animals. Or in this case, the image that I'm showing here, it was about birds, and, you know, we always have a carton of eggs in the fridge. So for that period of time, that's what I was doing basically day in and day out. And I had received this notification from the Vermont Studio Center that they were having a broadside competition, and I planned to enter, but of course I entered, you know, looked at it at the 11th hour and realized that for a broadside competition, you also needed to have text. So I frantically texted MJ asking if she would be willing to come up with a poem for one of my pieces within the next couple of hours. And thankfully she said yes. I don't know, MJ, if you want to add?
Well, and lo and behold, we won. So it was, and you know, it was the beginning, not the beginning, a continuation of a very fruitful collaboration. But we decided from that positive experience, and here's the broadside, that we wanted to continue doing all the animals that Meredith had been working on. This one, I'll quickly read the poem that goes with this image. It's called worth. And so Meredith's idea was to sort of play with animals, animal themes, the idea of games being something that are very sort of heavily laden with animal imagery when you're growing up. And that one way that you could foster engagement with animals and with the idea of animals would be to try to play again with images of them as an adult. And so for my part, I thought, well, what's a way that I could play here also? And of course, wordplay comes into it. And I don't know much, I don't have much lived experience with a lot of the animals that we ended up treating for this exhibit. Endangered animals are not often from Connecticut. And so, I don't know a lot about elephants or buffaloes, but strangely, what we do have a lot of in our language are aphorisms, cliches, all sorts of, ingrained language about these animals that is at odds with their experience in our world. So for this one, which is about birds and an egg in the hand, I thought, well, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, whatever that expression really means. And so I thought I'd sort of try to play with that idea for this picture. So this is what I came up with. Worth. A bird in the hand, a hand in the bush, an egg in the bird, a bird in the egg, an egg in the nest, a nest in the bush, a hand in the nest, an egg in the hand. And it seemed to sort of get at this slightly creepy quality about, there's a man who's peering between the bushes in the center to try to steal eggs and things like that.
Nice. So for me, the art part of the project took a turn from there, where I started printing out some of the images in black and white and then hand coloring them with markers and pens. So I have proceeded to do that with about 15 images, which we'll be installing at the Yale Health Plan in the next few weeks. And I've named each image after a board game. MJ alluded to that sense of play and games. I tried to think about that within the image, of creating sort of a treasure map or pathway. So here I just like to point out that when I put that little elephant clip on my finger, I was looking for things within the house that had to do with elephants. That's actually like a little clip I got at my 4th grade birthday party. And of course, Trader Joe's peanut butter has elephants on it. But in this one, you're often tying something on your finger, not to forget. Elephants never forget. So sort of the story behind that. This one is called Rhino Hero. And MJ, did you want to read the poem for this one?
Oh, sure, yeah. And we decided for the exhibit, instead of having, like in the first broadside, the text on the image, that we would separate them and have the text on the wall next to the image so that it would be easier to read, basically. So my rhino poem is actually about a specific fossil that's at the Peabody Museum. It's called Let Sleeping Bones Lie. Here at the Museum of Sleeping Bones, in a silent drawer down a darkened row, a stone jawbone older than knowable time. Teleoceras, our last rhinoceros. 10 million years ago, this jawbone roamed Nebraska, warm savanna and watering holes, till a volcano's drifting ash laid it to rest. One jawbone to speak of a species gone. Here at the museum, the unburied bones in silent drawers down darkened rows lie dreaming of what is lost.
That's really beautiful. This is my first time hearing that. This is moose hunt.
Oh, I was going to just mention, this one was really striking to me because it made me realize all these mugs with moose on them, how we tend to fetishize animals in a strange way while not actually seeming to care very much about what happens to the real animals themselves. So that's something that working on this project has caused me to think about.
This is Be Safe or Be Sorry. This one is called Battle Bears. And this one is Go Go Giraffe, which I think MJ would like to read the poem.
Yeah, this will be my last poem. So this one, you know, part of my process was that Meredith had finished all these images before I got involved. So I was looking to her images for clues as what direction to take things in. And so I noticed that newspaper clipping that's in the center of the photograph, that's something from the Beinecke's collection, and I started reading it, and it's a French newspaper clipping from 1827 about the visit of this giraffe to Paris. And I thought, well, there can't have been that many giraffes in Paris back then. And indeed, there were not. This giraffe was famous for being the first one seen in Europe since Hannibal paraded all these exotic animals through the mountains. So this particular giraffe was celebrated in her time. And my poem about her is called Zarafa, 1827. Take Her Highness, La Giraffe, a gift, empire to empire. Only still a calf when she was taken from her mother's teat and tossed on the back of a camel and trotted to Khartoum. There the Nile took her to the mouth of the sea, Alexandria, where she left one boat for the belly of another. They cut a hole in the deck for her neck to stretch, hung prayers at her throat. Many miles and months later, it was Marseille. She walked again on 4 legs longer than the last time her hooves had touched land. She was still a growing calf. An entourage of cows for her milk, men for her keep, a naturalist with gout to walk beside her, and the crowds thronging, surging, growing even faster than she was as she walked 600 miles north to Paris. Georges Sand saw her there. Her young son carried his own stuffed giraffe. 100,000 others turned out to see Le Bel Animal du Roi, planted at last in the Jardin des Plantes. She lived 18 years in that garden, the king's beautiful folly, no name of her own, who once ate rose petals from his hand. In a year, she was forgotten. A passing fad soon passed. What manner of gift was that?
Great. And these are just the last couple of ones. This is Sea Creature Surf. Buffalo Roundup. And Harpoon. And this last one I haven't yet finished coloring. This is one of my favorites though. This is Hound and Hare. And I think that's it.
Great. So if you have question for MJ and Meredith, please put that into the Q&A. But I wonder if you could say, I mean, these are beautiful, and I love the poetry to go along with it. I wonder if you could just say something about the Meredith, maybe the intersection of the household objects and the Beinecke's images, and what you saw as the relationship between those items, and I don't know how you were thinking about that.
So I think maybe I even approached it like a game, because we were in the lockdown. I couldn't go anywhere to collect anything or buy anything to go with the photos. So it forced me to sort of dig deep and think about, what I had within my own home. And, for instance, in the rhino photo, there's a pepper grinder that looks a lot like a rhinoceros with its horn. It turns out for the buffalo one that I still had, these 22-cent stamps from my childhood that I had saved. And also that, even clothing labels, there's like a Buffalo David Britton label. So, it may not be obvious, but there's a shirt in there that shows that label. I included like a map of Buffalo, New York. So it was sort of fun. And then combining these game pieces, you might have seen the game set or Jenga within those, or I took game pieces from other things that I had. So it was fun. And that last one of the bunny or the hare, you may see that I had my arms crossed and I was drawing with pink and blue, but the colors were reversed. So it was fun. Like I had a lot of fun doing it, fun collecting, and sort of, the collection part matching what existed in the Beinecke archive.
It's really interesting, the idea of bringing fun to representations of endangered species. I mean, I know that when I do my lecture on the passenger pigeon and the bison, it's often one of the more depressing lectures in my environmental history course. And I guess I wonder two things. One, how did you think about the idea of fun in relationship to, and playfulness in relationship to endangered species and their images, and more generally, how's this project maybe changed your ideas about animals, or how you think about animals? Is there any way in which that's been influential for you?
Yeah, so in this process, like before COVID lockdown presented this opportunity, I had been thinking about animals in the Beinecke. And one thing that I noticed, as I photograph books, is that, the way the animals were rendered, may not have been accurate, a long time ago. So, and sometimes when I would flip the page, I would see sort of a ghostly image of the rendering of the animal. So I started to think about other ways in which, animals could be, that I could look at endangered animals in the collection. But then when we weren't there for 3 months, I sort of found this new path. And, I think it's one thing I did learn is it's not a common way for the Beinecke digital collection to be used, to be, searching by animals. Usually it's, I think a more scholarly academic approach. So I know that even all of the images of rhinoceroses are not available to me in a simple search of rhino. So there were, I guess what, maybe what could relate to what you're saying is sort of the limitations in every way of finding images, whether in, well-established repository or within my own home. So I think one thing, MJ and I are thinking is that to appeal to children and to get sort of children involved in thinking about endangered animals. And that's one reason why we've selected the sort of hallway to pediatrics at the health plan to show our work, and maybe even hang some of the work lower to get kids involved, because I think they might have the most passion for taking this on as an issue.
That's great. We're gonna have to move along. So MJ, you might be able to jump in later at the end if we have time for further conversation. But I hope that we're in New Haven, or stop by Yale Health and check it out. And when will it be up, and when will it be on display?
Hopefully the second week of February.
Excellent. Very exciting. So, okay, we're going to turn now to Grace Cajski. You're going to share your project. And folks, if you have questions that you want to ask our panelists, please do put them in the Q&A. Grace?
Awesome. Let me share my screen. Okay, hi everyone. I'm really excited to tell you about my summer project on ancient Hawaiian fish ponds, which was generously supported by the Environmental Humanities Program, in addition to the Global Food Fellowship, the Law, Ethics, and Animal Student Grant, and the CIPE Summer Journalism Fellowship. So I first found out about fish ponds, or started really, getting into them and learning about them during a gap year, part of which I spent on Oahu interning for HIMB, the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, which you can see here. It's based at Coconut Island, which is in Kaneohe Bay. And so while I was there, a family friend who is sort of in this fish pond world showed me around, and he kind of told me their history and their story, and I became really enthralled. So I'll start by sort of explaining the fish pond concept to y'all. So the Hawaiian Islands are all essentially, pretty mountainous in the center, and then the mountains kind of, gradually descend down out into the sea. And they had this ancient land management system called the Ahupua'a system, which was very ingenious, and it essentially divided land by watershed. So there'd be sort of pie-shaped segments. So, at the very, at the top of the mountain would catch the clouds would rain fresh water down upon, the mountains, or percolate down. It would kind of also have a little bit of surface flow, and it would go, through the forest, through the village, through the taro fields, and out eventually to the sea, where it formed estuarine habitat. And this habitat is really critical because that's, a really rich biodiverse place that has all sorts of the major macronutrients that, all sorts of seaweed can grow, and it's very rich in fish. So the ancient Hawaiians kind of noticed that this area was really rich. They also noticed that a lot of fish, especially these mullet, are catadromous, meaning that they sort of spend their lives in these estuarine areas, and then they go out to the sea to spawn, and then babies are born out in the ocean, and they come back and swim to the estuarine areas. So the ancient Hawaiians saw this process of the fresh water going into the sea and forming rich biodiverse habitat. They saw this process of the baby mullet swimming into the pond, and they realized that they could leverage these processes to form this awesome sustainable food system, which are called loko'ia, or fish ponds. So they dry stacked these lava rocks and to form a lava rock wall called a kuapa. So that allowed water to kind of flow in and out as the tides changed. And then they built these sluice gates called makaha, which allowed the little baby fish to swim in. They'd grow fat in the pond, on all of the available foods, and then, be too fat to swim out. So they're stuck in there, and you can catch them. And so one of the primary organisms in the pond would be these baby mullet. So that was kind of the fish pond concept. And then unfortunately, Western contact and colonization happened, and that really changed the way that land was managed, and also the way that people worked. Fish ponds were kind of communally tended. Once people started having, jobs and that sort of thing, the fish ponds fell into disrepair. And in fact, some fish ponds were dredged or filled in. So the fish ponds kind of wasted away up until maybe 50 years ago or so. And there's this sort of, there's a Hawaiian cultural renaissance. And with that came this move to build up the fish ponds and restore them and get them growing food again. And this movement is really important in today's context, because the fish ponds can be a source of food sovereignty and food security. Here's a picture of my family eating some oysters at a pond, some fresh oysters that the pond created. And this is really important for Hawaii because they've got, I think it's something like 90% of their food is imported. So if anything were to happen, they've only got a maybe 2-week supply of food before it runs out. So that's important. The pond aquaculture can provide economic self-sufficiency, especially if they grow fish, not just these herbivores like mullet, but bivalves like oysters. Since they're wetlands, they can be a really great carbon sink. Because of the spillover effect, they can be used for restorative aquaculture. And then, of course, they can help mitigate for resource scarcity. They're really efficient. And so that can help as we have a growing population. However, this fish pond aquaculture, I learned, is they've got invasive species. At the bottom, there's a picture of me. You can't really see, but I'm at a beach, and I'm holding this invasive gorilla ogo. There's pollution. That's a picture of some trash I just found in the sand at Kailua Beach. There's climate change, which is causing king tides, and those king tides overcome the lava rock wall. And then, they can even just knock it down, or they can also just let the fish swim out. There's changing freshwater flows, which changes the nutrients, so the fish aren't able to, eat what they need to eat. There's declined fisheries. The mullet fishery in particular has really declined on Oahu. And there's limited funding to address all of these problems as the fish ponds try to restore. And that really struck me because obviously, the work they're doing is commendable and important. And I realized that perhaps the lack of funding is because what do people outside of Hawaii or who don't have a connection to Hawaii know about these Hawaiian fish ponds and their importance and their potential to inspire other sustainable forms of aquaculture. And because of this minimal public understanding, there's limited public support. And that's where the environmental humanities comes in. I think it's a really powerful tool to drive public support and understanding. And so that inspired me to start this project, which had a goal of reaching a local and broad audience with a story of resilience and dedication to the fish pond community, to demonstrate the power of their work and to celebrate Hawaiian culture, because so much of storytelling, I think, is not only, sharing information and stuff, but it's also about celebration, because I think that, work like this really does deserve to be celebrated. And so I had the chance to talk to all sorts of people, 40 different, scientists, conservationists, fish pond caretakers, and they told me all sorts of stories. So, they told me about the work to restore the ponds. They told me about the effects of climate change, overpopulation, invasive species, potential future uses for the fish ponds. And they also told me personal stories, their hopes and goals. And so during my time on Oahu during the summer, I just was really immersed in this world and really inspired by it. And something that I noticed was, in the months leading up to going to the island, I was reading a lot of scientific and popular literature on the ponds, and I got a pretty complete history of the ponds. I understood their general cultural importance. I got a lot of quantitative data, how much mullet are the ponds producing today, which is 0 on Oahu. And then, I got storytelling from stakeholders, which was so much more rich. They told me about, the familial and personal importance of the ponds. They told me personal histories. They recollected operating the ponds. And there's something so vivid about it that was just enticing. And I wanted to learn more. And they gave me qualitative data. So for example, one man told me that when his father operated a fish pond, he would kind of look out at the mullet and it would look like dark clouds in the ocean, which is that's so alive. That's so much more interesting. It's so much more powerful because you understand the emotional importance too. And so, my goal with this was to have stories and public outreach, which could hopefully increase public understanding and then, have greater public support, increase funding in a way, that is ultimately kind of driving the way that the ponds are restoring. And so some deliverables from this project, I submitted transcripts with Kapuna, our elders, to the UH Manoa Center for Oral History. I thought this was really important because one reason why the ponds fell into disrepair is because the Hawaiians have an oral history, and that, with colonization, that was not able to happen, and so much knowledge was lost. So it was important to me not to just be a storyteller, but to allow these kupuna to tell their stories on their own. And then, of course, I, was published in a couple of publications, and I gave a couple of talks, and it's just been really gratifying to be able to tell this story and increase people's understanding of the ponds and all of the awesome work being done there. So thank you guys for listening. If you have any questions, please let me know. And thank you again, Paul.
Great, Grace, that's wonderful. And a reminder, if you have a question for Grace, you can put that into the Q&A, which I hope is working. Haven't gotten any questions into the Q&A yet, so I encourage someone to put it in there and test it out. So Grace, you are an environmental studies and an English major, so you're sort of and I thought your talk was a great illustration of the relationship between those two fields, I guess, in terms of the storytelling and also some of the science. And I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about the storytelling part of it and the I don't know, the what some of the particular elements of stories were, that you encountered, maybe the variety of them, where there are different perspectives on the fish ponds, different responses from people of different age groups. I don't know, just a little bit more about the stories and what you found there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because everyone kind of says the ponds are all different. One person said they all have different personalities. And so, of course, the problem, everyone knows the danger of a single story, which was something I really tried to avoid. I didn't want to be reductive, but everyone in this community is so awesome, and they have such strong personalities, and I really wanted to let them shine. So, in terms of storytelling, I was careful to pick quotes that were, accurate and also, indicative of their personalities. And in terms of different stakeholders, I mean, the ponds are at this kind of nexus of, they just, in Hawaii, there really is a lot of public interest in them. So, there are lawmakers, there's all sorts of people who are trying to decide, what do you do in a place that technically is maybe in navigable waterways, or a place that is a historical site? How do you decide permitting? There's the landowners, which are often different from the fish pond caretakers, the people who are doing the day-to-day work. And so it is important to me to kind of hear all aspects of that story. And then there are people who are sort of tangentially related to the ponds, people who, are doing aquaculture in a different form, or who did research to close the mullet life cycle that also interested me and were also part of the story.
You've been able to write quite a number of things. That last slide was very suggestive of that, with the piece in Eco Magazine, and also the Oceanographic Magazine, and elsewhere. Can you say a little bit about the process of taking a project from summer, research event, research activity, where you did these interviews and turning it into actually published articles? So what were the major challenges there in doing that, and how did you make the contacts with these places, and how did it work out? What happened?
Yeah, I think it was a mixture of luck, persistence, and also, I don't know, a little bit of, I mean, I emailed everyone. I emailed all sorts of different magazines, and I got a lot of rejections. But for example, with Eco Magazine, I completely lucked out because they were just doing an aquaculture issue and were sort of looking for something, more along the lines of sustainable aquaculture. In terms of Oceanographic Magazine, I thought that they were ignoring my email because I sent one and then followed up a couple of times, but it turned out that they had just been busy that time, and it just took a couple months for them to clear out their inbox and get to that one email. So I would say it became more than a summer project. It became pretty all-consuming, and that's kind of how it ended up getting, in these different publications.
Well, it's an excellent story of persistence, and I think that is a key element of seeking publication for projects is really seeing it through to the end and not taking silence or no for the final word. So congratulations on that. Okay, why don't we keep going? Thank you, Grace. That was wonderful, and I'd like to turn now to Laura, who's joining us from Brazil, and we're delighted to have you. And it's all the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll share my screen. Wait, can you see my screen? Okay. So I want to begin by thanking very much for the opportunity to be in conversation with you all today. I want to thank Paula, Abigail, Maria, and Diana for organizing the panel today, and Meredith, MJ, and Grace for sharing their incredible work now. I'll present our project in partnership with the Environmental Humanities Grant Program, Mapping Grounds for Operation in the Jaraguá Indigenous Land. And just to give a little bit of context, this project proposal initiated as my master thesis in the Master of Environmental Design program at Yale School of Architecture. And this is a collaboration with Guarani Imbia communities in the Jaraguá, with the Brazilian architect and professor Flávia Bueno, and graphic design students from Yale School of Arts, Miguel Gaidosh and Nick Massarelli. And I also want to situate myself while doing this project and presenting today. So I engage in this work as a juruá. Juruá is the Guarani Mbiá term for non-indigenous, white, from settler origin. And I will begin this presentation by situating the project background. Then I will discuss a bit of what are the important lessons that we learn with this project, and I'll conclude with some next steps that this project brings and we will engage with. So this is a common imagination of the city of São Paulo in Brazil, a city of dense urbanism. But 200 years ago, São Paulo was Atlantic forest in its entirety. For the Guarani Mbiá indigenous nation, the Atlantic forest is sacred, yet only 12% of the Atlantic forest biome remains today. And in this presentation, I would like to complicate this dichotomic narrative of São Paulo as a densely constructed city to instead engage with other narratives. Here we center on present Guarani geographies and on the future of the Atlantic forest. Guarani communities in the north and south of São Paulo hold a crucial infrastructural and environmental role, increasing São Paulo's environmental security by recovering degraded soils and recuperating Atlantic forest areas. The Guarani concept of Yurupá determines the amplitude of the Guarani territory. Yurupá can translate as terrestrial support or terrestrial platform. Yurupá can also translate as earth as body. It means a world without frontiers and comprehends vast territorial mobility. It also means the territorial occupation before settler colonizers' arrival and the refusal of frontiers imposed by nation states. Spatial mobility structures Guarani kinship on this terrestrial platform as a fluid migration between the villages through continuous networks and exchange of news, seeds, rituals, plants. And since 1580, when settler colonizers found gold in Jaraguá Peak, the area has been environmentally impacted, initiating the dispossession of indigenous inhabitants from their lands in Jaraguá Peak. 500 years later, additional infrastructural layers in the peak continue to undermine Guarani land rights and deforest Atlantic forest. Urban constructions in the surroundings of Jaraguá Peak encroached upon the Atlantic forest. The roads polluted water, interrupted rivers, and disrupted access to medicinal plants, craft materials, and material for the construction and repair of houses. They also eliminated the habitat of boars and other forest inhabitants, exposing them to risk. The construction of roads have fragmented Guarani paths. However, the Guarani use the same infrastructural layers as tactics of resistance. This project learns from the long history of Guarani resistance. Without the acknowledgement of Guarani territory, the Atlantic forest also remains vulnerable to urban encroachment in Jaraguá Peak. This is in the background is Jaraguá Peak. Oh, sorry. In addition, a state park that overlaps the Jaraguá indigenous land restricts Guarani agricultural practices in these areas. A shared governance with the state park can allow the Guarani to harvest traditional materials and medicinal plants inside the park area and organize pedagogical initiatives informing visitors about the Atlantic forest preservations. So this project proposed to create instruments, visual materials, and documents that increase public awareness about Guarani land rights and Atlantic forest preservation in the Jaraguá. To exemplify this idea of instrument that this project refers to, we'll see this short video. In 2014, the Guarani communities in São Paulo sent a pen specially prepared by the Guarani with Guarani crafts for the Brazilian minister who has the power to guarantee the Guarani land's demarcation. The act of sending the pen is a strategy to pressure the minister who holds the power to sign Guarani land rights in São Paulo. As they say in the video, open quote, "We send these and other gifts to remind you of your obligation. But as we think that maybe one pen won't be enough for him, even if it's so pretty, we announce for every signature from a supporter that we get, we'll buy one more pen, which will also be sent to the minister." So this project thinks what are other instruments the non-Indigenous allies with the Guarani Mbia Nation in the Jaraguá can contribute to pressure non-Indigenous agents, such as city council members and government decisions. We design small appendixes which aim to be attached to other documents intended for government pressure or simply serve to amplify the public engagement. One of these appendixes represents gather case studies of spatial evidence for infrastructure reparations, asking how infrastructural dispossession and urban growth can serve as a factor for reparations. The second appendix consists on maps and visual narratives that trace and complicate the story of each infrastructural layer that fragmented the Guarani territory in Jaraguá Peak. This project maps in section and perspective, resisting top-down views with a multi-scalar and multi-temporal analysis. Roads construction in Jaraguá Peak facilitated the commodification of land, starting in the road's margins. Before the roads construction in the Jaraguá Peak, the peak was still a continuous territory linked to neighboring Atlantic forest areas inhabited by boers and other non-humans. And the project also mapped the agents that own and profit from these infrastructures and where they are situated. Nonetheless, the Guarani communities in and beyond São Paulo continue their continental paths and remake Guarani geographies every day. Guarani resistance and their spatial practices are the reason why Atlantic forests still exist in São Paulo. And tellingly, an urban heat map of São Paulo reveals how the areas where Guarani indigenous lands exist are also the lower incidence of urban heat in the city. Big part of this project was the question of how to make a document. And in addition to the appendix booklets that we made with this, that I showed previously, this project also produced a website, an interactive platform, scale and time to expose the history of deforestation and extraction caused by roads, telecommunication towers, and power lines construction, not as static stories. Sectional maps also allow to see forests as space of connections, not resources. And maps carry limits of translation and are not completely accurate. Instead of aiming accuracy and fixture, these sectional maps foreground contradictory, uncertain, and ever-shifting ground relations. And this website was coded by Lucas Ziegler Hiding, and without his work, this platform would not exist. So this work was a collaborative effort and is indebted to many. And the work process involved unlearning previous ideas of space and top-down mappings and drawings, trying and failing on how to depict the deep complexity of ground relations. I also want to be careful and foreground how not to romanticize conflict with these drawings and the importance of how to bring this work to practice while deforestation is ongoing. And this project faces limits in translation. The work travels within 3 complex languages, Guarani Mbia, Portuguese, and English. And the project seeks to highlight the clashes of city constructions, which cross and overlap numerous cosmologies and epistemologies. And just to end very quickly, this work continues and is a long-term process. And one future intention of the project is to complicate the maps produced, including other layers to the website, other forms of collective mapping and oral histories. We also aim to expand the appendixes with a 3rd volume with the organization of case studies of state parks shared governance. And a new 3rd demand that appeared and now collaborating with another group here in São Paulo, Coletivo Chão, from a Guarani Imbia leader of the Piau village who once reviewed some of the houses of the Piau village, and we are working to raise funds to make the houses renovation. And that's it. I think we're open for discussion. Thank you.
That's great, Laura. Very impressive work. And if you'd like to put any questions in the chat or the Q&A, I'd be happy to receive those. I wonder if you could say something more about, I'm interested in the representational aspects of your project, the mapping and the very intricate and beautiful designs. And I wonder how you think about those in the effort to create a counter narrative to other stories of this area, and maybe what specific stories you might be countering, and what the tensions could be between those stories, and those, like, is there another version of other maps that your maps are contesting? How do you think about these representational issues?
Sure, thank you for your question. About the mapping, it was a difficult process, and I think the majority of the time that I was doing this project, I started mapping it by a top-down narrative, and it took from the beginning. I knew that this top-down narrative erases so many relations on the ground, and so many complexities of and temporalities. So it was since the beginning a question that I wanted to address: how not to be a static and top-down representation, but at the same time it was difficult to learn how to change this narrative, how to effectively propose another way. And the sectional representation was a way to see different relations that were erased on the top-down view. However, it still is a static representation. So the website was another attempt to overlay images. The website was another attempt to make relations between images so you can change over time. But it was still difficult because I was in New Haven all the time, and I couldn't be here to talk with the Guarani, with the communities, the different villages in the Jaraguá. So this is now something that I want to do now, and to add more layers to this mapping. So I think this is a very important thing to the project, so that there is not one perspective, but many perspectives that are in conversation and that question each other. And about the specific maps that the project addressed, I think something that from the beginning I struggled with, there were court documents that represented Jaraguá Peak, and all the Atlantic forest was erased, all the Guarani relations to the land were erased, and everything that appeared in the maps these were maps made by the São Paulo government. And what appeared in the maps were the road constructions, were these projects, but it was not representing what it was erasing. So these maps are also a response to these government maps that erased these other relations to the land.
So we have a few questions that are related to both, I guess, audience for your project and also collaboration. And I think people are interested. I think people would be interested to hear more about your collaborative efforts. I know it was difficult with COVID and being stuck in New Haven when you were here. But in terms of how you've sought to work with Guarani on this project, and then also the question of audience. How do you think about who use these materials? Are you concerned about the response to them? These are obviously potentially valuable lands. This could be quite controversial. How do you think about the audience for the project too?
Yes, so first about my relation with the Guarani, it was very difficult to do this project from far away. I was, the 2 years I was working on this project on my master's, I was in New Haven. So what I started to do a Guarani Imbia language classes. So I was every week meeting with Anthony, who was the professor and Guarani leader who was teaching us about the Guarani Imbia language, but as we learned about the language, we were learning about the Guarani relation to the land, specifically in the Jaraguá and in the village that he lives, which is the Itu village. So I was working with several groups from Brazil, this other group, Coletivo Chão, who I'm working now to do the renovation of the houses of another village, the PL village. I was working with Flavia, who is another professor from here. So we were working together. They were here in close conversation with some of the villages in the Jaraguá and some of the Guarani communities. But now it's the moment that I am truly here to continue this work in close relation. So this is a slow process. It's not resolved. It's something that is getting stronger during the time.
We'll welcome other questions. I have a question here actually for all three panelists in our final moments, which is related to the one that I was just asking. It's from Max Chaudier. I wonder, Max asks about, from all of you, who the public is that you imagine your project speaking to. And so these are public humanities projects, but who's the public? And how is that informed, how you pursue the projects, frame them, develop them, and sought to share them. So I guess that's open to all three of you to reflect on.
I could start with that. Our public is pretty specific. It is the visitors and patients who go to the Yale Health Plan. And, so that did actually affect some of what we could choose to depict in the images, and also what I would choose to depict in the poems, because the Arts at Yale Health Committee, we have guidelines for what we can include in images. They can't be violent, they can't depict knives or weapons, dead bodies, anything that would make you feel uncomfortable if you were in the building as a patient. And so we have to respect that in our project. And I felt I had to respect that in my words as well. And so, Paul was saying earlier how some of the things we talk about with endangered animals are extremely depressing. And so, I was researching rhinos and the plight of the northern white rhino, of whom there are only 2 left, and they're both female. And so they are living extinction for the rest of their days on this planet. And, but it's not really an appropriate venue to address that particular thing so aggressively. And so trying to think about other ways to talk about the subjects so that they inspire the audience who is there to at least start to think about these things where maybe they haven't before, was my aim.
Grace or Laura?
Yeah, for me, it was pretty much like not self-selecting, but it was sort of whichever magazines accepted me as an inexperienced writer who didn't have a very strong portfolio. So, I really did want to reach out and have some local magazines. But of course, a lot of people in Hawaii already know about fish ponds. And so the stories that I could tell after just 30 days on the island wouldn't be as rich as other ones that are sort of available there. But I did want to make sure to have the transcripts no matter what.
Yeah, and I think my project has different audience. I can think of mostly we're working with the Guarani, so the Guarani are more partners, the Guarani communities in the Jaraguá, but we're also this material comes to them. So we're of course thinking of these specific needs. Then larger audience is the non-indigenous people in São Paulo who are also responsible and related to the Atlantic forest maintenance and learning from the many benefits, the Guarani special initiatives in São Paulo, how they are providing other ways to think of the city of São Paulo. So I think there is, in general, the public who lives in São Paulo, non-indigenous people. Also, how these documents arrive to city council or the park administration, how these booklets can serve as an instrument to inform other perspectives and start discussions. And then I think there's a question that is more personal of my background, but this is also a work that speaks with architects and spatial practitioners on how we represent space, what are we erasing when we represent space, what other relations can we create from representing and depicting. So I think these are four broad publics that the work is engaging with.
Maybe maybe just one last question would be, you know, I don't know, any final, you know, things that you might have learned through the process of pursuing your project. Any lesson or particular, you know, thing you're taking away from it that is that you didn't know before you started, or? Or a particular challenge?
There are many lessons and challenges, but I think one strong lesson that remains is about time. When you work with other interlocutors, with other spaces and specific negotiations, there is a time that you cannot control. So it's something that you cannot foresee. What is the time of this project and how you resolve? This doesn't depend only on you.
Yeah, it's different from just doing your own project. Yeah. Any final thoughts, Grace or MJ? Great. Okay, well, I just thank you so much for sharing your projects today. These are three remarkable and fascinating projects. We're delighted to have supported them and see where you've taken them. And we hope that we may be able to do another Humanities in Action panel later this semester to share some of the additional projects that people are doing in the Yale community related to the environmental humanities. So stay tuned, everyone, for that. And thanks again for joining us today. So I hope you have a great day or evening wherever you may be. And thank you again to our panelists. So wonderful presentations.